A blood-curdling scream tore through the crisp autumn air, snapping Eliza Hayes awake from her dreamless sleep. She bolted upright in her wagon, heart hammering against her ribs, as the smell of smoke invaded her nostrils. Outside, the crackle of flames and menacing laughter confirmed her worst fears. They had found her. Nevada Territory, 1876. The silver boom in Piach had drawn fortune seekers, honest workers and vultures alike to the rugged landscape. At 22, Eliza had inherited her father's modest freight business after typhoid fever claimed him last winter. She'd been making the run from Salt Lake City to Piach for 6 months now, delivering essentials to the burgeoning mining town against her aunt's vehement protests that hauling goods was no business for a lady. Eliza fumbled for her father's Remington revolver beneath her pillow as shadows danced across the canvas walls of her wagon. The heat intensified, and she could see the orange glow of flames licking at the wooden slats beneath the canvas. Come out, Miss Hayes," a gruff voice called. "We warned your pa about cutting into our business. Seems his daughter's just as stubborn." The Blackwell Gang. They'd threatened her father before his death, demanding exclusive rights to freight deliveries in Lincoln County. When Eliza continued the business, they'd sent warnings, slashed harnesses, spoiled cargo. Now they'd escalated, clutching the revolver with white knuckles. Eliza grabbed her leather satchel, stuffed with what little money she had and her mother's locket, and crawled toward the back of the wagon. The smoke thickened, burning her lungs and stinging her eyes. A crash from the front told her someone had climbed aboard. She had seconds, not minutes. With a desperate kick, Eliza burst through the rear canvas and tumbled onto the hard ground, the fall knocking the wind from her lungs. 3 men surrounded her wagon, their faces illuminated by the roaring flames consuming her home, her livelihood, her father's legacy. She recognized Sela's Raid, the gang's second in command, his face twisted in a cruel smile as he spotted her. "There she is, boys. Don't let her escape." Eliza scrambled to her feet, firing a warning shot that sent the men diving for cover. She ran, barefoot in her nightdress, toward the tree line 50 yards away. The crack of gunfire followed, bullets kicking up dirt around her feet. She zigzagged, praying to the gods she'd started doubting since her father's death. The forest swallowed her, branches tearing at her skin and hair as she plunged deeper into the darkness. Behind her, the men's shouts grew more distant, but she didn't slow. She couldn't. Her wagon, everything she owned, was burning to ashes behind her. Hours later, as the first pale light of dawn broke through the trees, Eliza found herself at the edge of a creek, miles from where her wagon had stood. Her feet were bloody, nightgown torn, and her dark hair a wild tangle around her shoulders. The revolver, now with only 4 bullets remaining, felt heavy in her hand. She slumped against a boulder, letting exhaustion and despair wash over her. Everything was gone. The wagon her father had built with his own hands, the team of horses likely stolen by the gang, and every penny of savings she'd managed to scrape together. Without her deliveries, the smaller businesses in Piach that relied on her would suffer. The Blackwell Gang would tighten their grip on the town. The sound of approaching hoofbeats jerked her back to alertness. Eliza raised the revolver with shaking hands, aiming at the bend in the creek where the rider would appear. "I'll shoot," she called out, her voice hoarse from smoke and exhaustion. "I swear I will." The rider slowed, and a deep voice responded, "Easy there, madam. I mean no harm." A tall figure on horseback emerged around the bend, a man with broad shoulders and a dark Stetson pulled low over his eyes. His duster was coated in trail dust, and the early morning light glinted off a silver star pinned to his vest. "My name's Zachary Nolan," he said, dismounting carefully and keeping his hands visible. "Deputy Marshal out of Piach. Saw the smoke from your wagon on my patrol. Been tracking you since." "How do I know you're not with them?" Eliza demanded, keeping the gun trained on him despite the tremble in her arms. Zachary slowly reached inside his vest and produced a folded document. "My credentials, miss. I've been hunting the Blackwell Gang for months. They've terrorized every honest business in the county." His eyes, a startling blue in his sun-weathered face, held steady on hers. "You're the Hayes girl, aren't you? Walter's daughter." The mention of her father's name broke something in Eliza. The revolver lowered slightly. "They burned everything," she whispered. "Everything my father built." Zachary approached cautiously, like one might a wounded animal. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps no more than 28, with a strong jawline shadowed by a day's growth of beard. "You're injured," he observed, eyeing her bloodied feet and the cuts on her arms. "Let me help you. My camp's not far from here." Pride warred with necessity in Eliza's mind. She had nowhere to go, nothing but the clothes on her back and her father's gun. After a long moment, she nodded, lowering the revolver completely. "I can't pay you," she said, her voice cracking. "They took everything." Something flashed across the deputy's face, anger perhaps, though not directed at her. "This isn't about payment, Miss Hayes. The law in these parts may be stretched thin, but it still stands for something." He offered her his canteen, which she accepted gratefully, taking small sips of the cool water. Then, with gentle hands that belied his rugged appearance, he helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. As they rode, Eliza felt the warmth of his body against her back, an unexpected comfort in the midst of devastation. They followed the creek for nearly a mile before veering west toward a small clearing where a modest camp was set up, a canvas tent, a ring of stones for a fire, and supplies secured on a second horse tethered nearby. Zachary eased her down from the saddle, supporting her when her injured feet threatened to buckle beneath her. He guided her to sit on his bedroll near the cold fire pit. "Let me tend to those cuts," he said, retrieving a leather kit from his saddlebag. "Then we'll figure out our next steps." Eliza watched as he methodically cleaned her wounds, his touch surprisingly gentle for hands so calloused and strong. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. "You don't know me." Zachary paused, meeting her gaze directly. "I knew your father, good man, honest. This territory needs more like him, not fewer." He resumed his work, cleaning a particularly nasty cut on her heel. "Besides, the Blackwell Gang has taken enough from these parts. I won't let them take another life." When he'd finished bandaging her feet, he built a small fire and prepared a simple breakfast of coffee and hardtack, softened in a pan with bacon grease. Eliza hadn't realized how hungry she was until the smell of food hit her. As they ate, Zachary outlined what he knew about the gang. "They've been moving between Nevada and Utah, controlling freight routes through intimidation and violence. Your father refused to be bullied, and you carrying on his business must have infuriated them." "I just wanted to honor his memory," Eliza said softly, staring into the fire. "He built that business from nothing after my mother died. Said hard work and honesty would always win out in the end. Your father was right about the principles, if not how the world sometimes works," Zachary replied. "I've been tracking them for 3 months, ever since they robbed the Piach bank and killed the teller, a boy of 19. The silence stretched between them as Eliza contemplated her situation. "What do I do now?" she finally asked, more to herself than to him. Zachary studied her for a long moment, taking in her determined expression despite the exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "First, you rest. Then we ride to Piach. I have a friend there, a widow who runs a boarding house. She'll help get you situated while I continue hunting the gang." Eliza shook her head firmly. No, I'm not hiding away in some boarding house while those men destroy everything my father built. Her green eyes flashed with sudden fire. I want justice, Deputy Nolan, and I want my business back. A smile tugged at the corner of Zachary's mouth, unexpected admiration warming his eyes. You're as stubborn as Walter always claimed. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. All right, Miss Hayes, we'll figure something out, but first rest. As Eliza reluctantly settled onto the bedroll he'd insisted she take, she watched him move around the camp with efficient purpose. Despite her devastation, a tiny spark of hope flickered to life. Perhaps everything wasn't lost after all. Zachary Nolan had been hunting men like the Blackwell Gang since the war ended. He'd seen too much death, too much injustice, to stand idle when the innocent suffered. But something about Eliza Hayes stirred protective instincts he'd long thought buried beneath duty and vengeance. As she finally drifted to sleep, her face softened from fierce determination to vulnerable beauty. He made a silent vow. The Blackwell Gang would pay for what they'd done not just to her, but to every family they'd terrorized across the territory. And somehow, he would help her rebuild what they'd destroyed. By mid-afternoon, Eliza awoke to find Zachary returning to camp, leading a dappled mare alongside his gelding. She sat up, wincing at her stiff muscles and tender feet. Found her wandering about 2 miles south, he explained, nodding toward the mare. Recognized the brand as one of yours, must have broken free during the attack. Eliza's heart leaped at the sight of her father's favorite horse. Penny, she breathed, struggling to her feet. The mare nickered softly as Eliza approached, nuzzling her palm. At least something survived. More than that, Zachary said, untying a bundle from the mare's back. Your saddlebags were still attached. Looks like they were in too much of a hurry to check. Inside the leather pouches, Eliza found a change of clothes, her ledger book, and a small locked box containing emergency funds. Her father had always insisted on carrying $50 in gold coins. It wasn't enough to rebuild completely, but it was something. A starting point. While Zachary prepared a simple supper, Eliza changed behind the privacy of some bushes, grateful to exchange her tattered nightgown for a practical riding skirt and blouse. The clothes hung looser than they had 6 months ago, evidence of the strain of running the business alone, but they made her feel human again, less like a victim. What's your plan now? Zachary asked as they sat by the fire, the evening air growing cool around them. Piach is still a day's ride away. Eliza squared her shoulders. I need to rebuild. My customers in Piach depend on me for supplies that the larger freight companies won't bother with. Small orders for the mercantile, medicines for the doctor, materials for the school teacher. Rebuilding takes money, Zachary pointed out gently, more than what you've got in that box. Then I'll earn it, she countered. I still have my contracts. I still have my word, which in business means something. Zachary studied her across the fire, the flames casting his features in sharp relief. There was something about her determination that stirred something in him: respect, admiration, and something else he wasn't ready to name. I've been saving to build a place of my own, he said finally. Been working as a deputy for 4 years, living simply. Have a plot of land outside Piach and enough lumber stockpiled to start a small house. He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. But before that, I could build you a wagon. Won't be fancy, but it'll get you back in business. Eliza stared at him in disbelief. Why would you do that? You've already done more than anyone could expect. Because what happened to you isn't right, he said simply. And because this territory needs people like you, people who stand their ground against men like the Blackwell Gang. The offer hung between them, unexpected and profound. Eliza had spent 6 months proving she didn't need anyone's help, that she could stand on her own despite the whispers about a woman running a freight business. But pride wouldn't rebuild her wagon or feed her horse. "I would pay you back," she said firmly, "every penny with interest." A smile touched Zachary's lips. "I'd expect nothing less from Walter Hayes' daughter." He extended his hand across the fire. "Do we have a deal?" Eliza reached out, her smaller hand disappearing in his calloused grip. "Deal." That night, as the fire burned low and Zachary took first watch, Eliza found herself studying him from beneath half-closed lids. There was a quietness to him that spoke of confidence rather than weakness, and a sense of justice that reminded her of her father. In a territory where men often measured their worth by how much they could take, Zachary Nolan seemed determined to be measured by how much he could give. It was a rare quality, one that pulled at something deep within her, a feeling she had no time for, not with her entire life in ashes and a gang of outlaws who wouldn't stop until she was ruined. Still, as she drifted back to sleep, she couldn't help wondering what kind of man would offer to build a wagon for a woman he barely knew, asking nothing in return but the satisfaction of seeing justice served. The journey to Piach took them through rugged country sagebrush valleys giving way to juniper-dotted hills beneath the vast Nevada sky. Zachary set a careful pace, mindful of Eliza's injuries and the need to remain vigilant against the Blackwell Gang, who might still be searching for her. "They won't stop," Eliza said as they paused to rest the horses near a spring. "Not until they control every freight route in the county." "Men like that never stop unless they're made to," Zachary agreed grimly. "That's why they need to face justice." Justice. Eliza tested the word, finding it bitter on her tongue. "Will that rebuild what they destroyed? Will it bring back the teller they killed?" Zachary's expression softened. "No, but it stops them from destroying more lives." He hesitated, then added, "After the war, I saw too many men who'd learned that violence pays. Came west thinking I could help bring some order to places that needed it." "Is that why you became a deputy?" "Partly." He adjusted his hat against the glare of the afternoon sun. "Also because I'm good with a gun, but didn't want to use it except in service to something worthwhile." They rode in companionable silence as the terrain grew more familiar to Eliza. They were approaching the outskirts of Piach from the east, avoiding the main road where the Blackwell Gang might have men watching. The town came into view as they crested a ridge, a scattered collection of buildings clinging to the hillsides, with the mines visible as scars in the earth beyond. Smoke rose from smelters and chimneys, evidence of the industry that had drawn people to this remote corner of Nevada. Despite everything, Eliza felt a surge of fondness at the sight. This rough-edged town had become home over the past months. "We'll go to my place first," Zachary decided. "It's isolated enough that you can rest there without worrying about being seen until we figure out our next move." His property lay 2 miles outside town, 10 acres of land with a small creek running through it. A sturdy lean-to served as temporary shelter, beside stacks of lumber and building supplies covered with canvas. It was modest, but spoke of careful planning and patient work toward something permanent. "It's not much," he apologized as he helped her dismount. "Been working on it when I can spare time from deputy duties." "It's wonderful," Eliza said sincerely, taking in the peaceful setting and evidence of his self-sufficiency. A vegetable garden, though sparse, provided some food. A crude forge stood under a juniper tree, tools neatly arranged beside it. "You've built this all yourself," she observed. Zachary nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. "My father was a carpenter back in Missouri, taught me everything he knew before the war took him." He began unloading their saddlebags. I've got coffee and beans. It's simple fare, but filling. As he built a fire and prepared a meal, Eliza found herself watching his methodical movements. There was nothing flashy about Zachary Nolan, nothing of the swagger many Western men affected. Instead, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his capabilities and limitations. "You said you could build a wagon," she ventured as they ate. "Did you mean that?" "I don't say things I don't mean, Miss Hayes." He gestured toward the stacked lumber. "Been collecting materials for my house, but a wagon's more important right now. Got tools, got wood." He met her gaze steadily. "What I build won't be as fine as what you lost, but it'll be solid. Might take a week or so. A week." A week of hiding, of being dependent on this man's generosity, while her customers waited for deliveries that wouldn't come, and the Blackwell Gang believed they'd won. As if sensing her thoughts, Zachary continued, "Tomorrow I'll ride into town. Let Sheriff Caldwell know what happened. He's a good man, even if he's stretched thin. Then I'll send word to your customers that there's been a delay, but you're still in business." "You seem to have it all figured out," Eliza said, not sure whether to be grateful or irritated at how easily he'd taken charge. A smile touched his lips. "Not even close, Miss Hayes. But I do know that sometimes taking things one step at a time is the only way forward." That night, Zachary insisted she take the lean-to while he slept under the stars. Exhaustion pulled at Eliza, but sleep proved elusive as her mind replayed the attack, the flames consuming her wagon, her father's legacy turning to ash. When she finally dozed off, nightmares waited fire and mocking laughter chasing her through darkness. She woke with a start, a scream caught in her throat to find Zachary kneeling beside her, concern etched on his face. "You're safe," he said quietly, his hand hovering near her shoulder but not touching. "It was just a dream." In the pale moonlight filtering through the lean-to's opening, Eliza could see the gentleness in his expression. Without thinking, she reached for his hand, needing an anchor to reality. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. "I used to have them too," he said softly. "After the war. Still do sometimes." "Does it get easier?" she whispered. "Yes," he said after a thoughtful pause. "Not because you forget, but because you build something new alongside the memories, something that's yours." They remained like that for several moments, connected by clasped hands in the darkness, before Zachary squeezed her fingers gently and released them. "Try to rest, Miss Hayes. Tomorrow we start rebuilding." As he moved back to his bedroll, Eliza felt the ghost of his touch lingering on her skin. Despite everything, despite the loss and fear and uncertainty, she felt something new taking root alongside the grief, a cautious hope that perhaps, with time and determination, she could indeed build something new from the ashes. True to his word, Zachary rode into Piach the following morning, leaving Eliza with strict instructions to remain on his property and keep his spare revolver close. "I'll be back by sundown," he promised. "There's food in the storage box and water from the creek is clean enough for washing." Alone for the first time since her wagon burned, Eliza took stock of her situation. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a simmering anger and determination. She would not let the Blackwell Gang win. Somehow, she would rebuild her father's business and continue his legacy. Unable to sit idle, she explored Zachary's property more thoroughly in daylight. His planning and attention to detail impressed her. The site for his future house marked out with stakes, the garden positioned to catch maximum sunlight, the lean-to built to withstand the region's infrequent but heavy rains. Near the forge, she discovered plans sketched on paper, detailed drawings for a modest cabin, with measurements carefully noted. The precision of the drawings spoke of a man who valued order and craftsmanship. By mid-afternoon, Eliza had swept out the lean-to, washed her spare clothing in the creek, and prepared a simple stew from the provisions Zachary had left. Her bandaged feet still pained her, but less severely than before. Activity felt better than idleness, action better than dwelling on her losses. When Zachary returned, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies, Eliza was sitting by a neat fire, her ledger open on her lap as she calculated what she would need to restart her business. "You've been busy," he observed, noting the improvements to the camp. "Couldn't just sit around feeling sorry for myself," she replied, setting aside her ledger. "What news from town?" Zachary unloaded his purchases: additional lumber, metal fittings, tools, and, to Eliza's surprise, fabric and sewing supplies. "Sheriff's organizing a posse to track the gang," he reported. "They hit the Sullivan place last night, stole horses, and threatened the family. They're getting bolder." Eliza's stomach clenched. The Sullivans had a daughter just 14, sweet-natured and shy. Were they hurt? No, just frightened. But it's a pattern: they're targeting anyone who does business with you instead of their preferred freight company. He paused in his unpacking. "I spoke with your customers at the mercantile and the doctor's office. They send their sympathies and say they'll wait for you to get back on your feet. Won't deal with Blackwell's men." Relief washed through her. "Thank you." Zachary nodded, continuing to sort through his purchases. "Got something else, too." He produced a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Sheriff found this nailed to his door this morning." The crude notice made Eliza's blood run cold. A $500 bounty for information leading to her whereabouts, signed by Victor Blackwell himself. The paper trembled in her hands. "He's hunting me like an animal." "He's desperate," Zachary countered, taking the notice back. "Men like Blackwell hate losing control more than anything. Your defiance threatens him." "My defiance might get me killed," Eliza said bitterly. Zachary's expression hardened. "Not while I'm around." He gestured to the supplies he'd brought. "I'll start on your wagon tomorrow. In the meantime, you should stay out of sight. Bought you some things for new clothes, figured what you have might be recognizable." Eliza examined the fabric: practical cotton in a muted blue that would blend in far better than her distinctive riding clothes. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "You've thought of everything," she said softly. "Not everything," he admitted with a wry smile. "Still trying to figure out how to catch Blackwell without putting you at more risk." As dusk fell, they sat by the fire eating the stew Eliza had prepared. Zachary shared what else he'd learned in town: rumors about the gang's hideout, speculation about their next targets, concern among the townspeople about the escalating violence. "People are afraid," he said, gazing into the flames. "Mining towns like Piach attract those looking to make their fortunes, but also those looking to take fortunes from others. Without reliable law enforcement, men like Blackwell thrive. And one deputy and an overworked sheriff aren't enough," Eliza concluded. "Exactly." He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "I've sent telegrams to the federal marshal's office in Carson City. Asked for reinforcements, but it could be weeks before they respond." They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned low. Finally, Eliza asked the question that had been on her mind since their meeting. "Why did you really decide to help me, Deputy Nolan? The truth." Zachary considered her for a long moment, his blue eyes reflecting the dying flames. "When I came west after the war, I was lost. Had seen too much death, too much cruelty. Your father gave me my first honest job in Nevada hauling freight while I figured out what to do with my life. Treated me fairly when others wouldn't hire a former Union soldier." "I don't remember you," Eliza said, surprised. "You were back east at your aunt's, finishing school. This was nearly 5 years ago." A sad smile touched his lips. Walter talked about you constantly, how proud he was of his educated daughter, how he was building the business for you to inherit someday. The revelation stunned Eliza. That her father had spoken of her with such pride to his employees, that this connection to Zachary had existed without her knowledge, it felt like a final gift from her father. "He would be grateful to you for helping me," she said softly. "I'm not doing it for gratitude," Zachary replied, meeting her gaze. "I'm doing it because it's right, and because I made your father a promise that I'd look out for you if you ever needed it." The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with implication. This wasn't random chance or simple kindness, it was a duty Zachary felt bound to honor, a promise to a man they'd both respected. "Thank you for telling me," Eliza finally said, emotion thickening her voice. "It means a great deal to know my father had such loyal friends." Later, as she settled into the lean-to for the night, Eliza found herself thinking about connections, how people's lives intertwined in ways they couldn't foresee or understand, until circumstances brought hidden threads to light. Her father, in his wisdom, had planted seeds of protection she hadn't known existed. And Zachary Nolan, the quiet deputy with skilled hands and a strong sense of justice, was the unexpected harvest of those seeds. The realization brought comfort as she drifted toward sleep, the nightmares kept at bay by this new understanding of her place in a web of care that extended beyond death. The first light of dawn found Zachary already at work, measuring and marking lumber for the wagon. Eliza watched from the lean-to entrance as he moved with practiced efficiency, his sleeves rolled up to expose muscular forearms as he sawed and planed with careful precision. "You don't have to just watch," he called, noticing her observation. "There's plenty to do if you're feeling up to it." Eager to contribute, Eliza joined him, following his instructions to sort hardware and sand rough boards. They worked side by side through the morning, falling into a rhythm that required few words. Zachary proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to use tools properly without making her feel incompetent. By midday, the basic frame of a wagon bed was taking shape, smaller than her lost freight wagon but sturdy and well-crafted. Watching Zachary work, Eliza found herself admiring more than his carpentry skills. There was an integrity to him that manifested in everything he did, from the way he measured twice before cutting to how he insisted on doing things right rather than quickly. "Your father taught you well," she remarked as they paused to eat a simple lunch. "He believed craftsmanship was a form of honesty," Zachary replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "Said a man who cuts corners with wood will cut corners in life." "My father had similar sayings," Eliza smiled. "He used to tell me the difference between a businessman and a thief is whether they still sleep soundly after making a profit." Zachary chuckled. "Sounds like Walter." He studied the wagon frame critically. "Should have the bed completed by tomorrow. After that, it's the running gear and wheels. Those will take longer." "I could help more if you'd teach me," Eliza suggested. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by consideration. "Most women wouldn't want to learn carpentry." "I'm not most women," she countered, "and knowledge is never wasted. My father taught me freight business. Why shouldn't I learn how to repair my own wagon?" A slow smile spread across Zachary's face. "Why not indeed? We'll make a carpenter of you yet, Miss Hayes." The days fell into a pattern, working on the wagon from dawn until dusk, with Zachary occasionally riding into town for supplies and information. Each evening by the fire, he would share news of Blackwell's activities and the growing tension in Piach. The gang had escalated their intimidation, demanding protection payments from businesses and threatening those who refused. "The sheriff's hands are tied without proof," Zachary explained one night, frustration evident in his voice. Everyone knows Blackwell's behind it, but his men are careful to keep his name out of their threats. As they worked side by side, a comfortable familiarity grew between them. Eliza learned that Zachary had grown up in Missouri, the son of a carpenter who opposed slavery despite living in a slave state. When war came, both father and son had joined the Union Army, but only Zachary had returned. "He died at Shiloh," Zachary said quietly as they worked on fitting wheel spokes. "Not from a bullet, but from camp fever afterward. I was in another regiment, didn't find out until weeks later." "I'm sorry," Eliza said softly, understanding all too well the pain of losing a father. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood in Salt Lake City, her mother's early death, and her years at a ladies' seminary in Pennsylvania, where her aunt had insisted she learn proper feminine accomplishments. "And yet here you are, building a wagon and running a freight business," Zachary observed with evident admiration. "My aunt nearly fainted when I told her my plans," Eliza admitted with a laugh. "Said I'd never find a husband if I insisted on doing men's work." "Some men value capability over conformity," Zachary replied, his eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to his work. The wagon progressed steadily. By the 5th day, the bed was complete and mounted on the running gears Zachary had crafted. The wheels proved more challenging, requiring precise woodworking for the hubs and careful fitting of spokes, but Zachary's patience never wavered as he taught Eliza each step of the process. On the 7th day, as they worked together to fit iron tires to the wooden wheels, heating them in the forge before sliding them onto the rims, Eliza realized something had shifted between them. The way Zachary's hands guided hers, the ease with which they anticipated each other's movements, the comfortable silences that needed no filling, these spoke of a connection deeper than gratitude or obligation. That evening, as they admired their nearly completed work, Eliza found herself studying Zachary's profile in the fading light. The strong jaw, the thoughtful eyes, the way his usual seriousness occasionally gave way to a smile that transformed his entire face, these details had become precious to her in ways she hadn't expected. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, catching her gaze. Heat rose to Eliza's cheeks at being caught staring. "I was just thinking how differently things might have turned out if you hadn't found me by the creek that morning." "Fate has strange ways," he replied, his voice low, "though I suspect you'd have found a way forward regardless. You've got your father's determination." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but I'm grateful nonetheless, for everything." Something in her tone made Zachary turn to face her fully, his expression suddenly serious. "Eliza," he said, using her given name for the first time, "I need you to understand something. What I'm doing helping you, building this wagon, it started as a promise to your father, but it's become something more." The admission hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Eliza's heart quickened as Zachary continued, choosing his words with characteristic care. "I admire you," he said simply. "Your courage, your determination, your willingness to fight for what's yours. In all my years since the war, I've rarely met any one man or woman with such quiet strength." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. "Zachary, you don't need to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I just wanted you to know that my help comes with no expectations. When this wagon is finished, you'll be free to rebuild your business however you choose. My feelings don't change that." Feelings. The word echoed in Eliza's mind as she struggled to formulate a response. Before she could speak, however, the sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the moment. Zachary was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his revolver. "Get to the lean-to," he ordered, his voice shifting to the authoritative tone of a lawman. "Could be trouble." Eliza obeyed, though she retrieved the spare revolver from its hiding place as she took cover. Through the gathering darkness, she could make out a lone rider approaching at a fast trot. "Nolan," a voice called. "It's Caldwell." The tension in Zachary's posture eased slightly as he recognized the sheriff, though he didn't holster his weapon until the rider came fully into view. Sheriff Thomas Caldwell was a grizzled veteran of the frontier, his weathered face grave as he dismounted. "Evening, Sheriff," Zachary greeted him. "What brings you out here?" "Trouble," Caldwell replied grimly, nodding acknowledgment to Eliza as she emerged from the lean-to. "Blackwell's men shot up the mercantile this afternoon when Owen refused to pay their protection fee. His boy's wounded, not serious, but it's got the town in an uproar." Eliza gasped. "Thomas Owen is barely 12. Wasn't intentional," Caldwell clarified. "Boy was behind the counter when they started shooting. Still, it's crossed a line. I've deputized a dozen men, but Blackwell's gathered his forces at the Silverton Saloon. They're drunk and threatening to burn down half the town if anyone tries to arrest them." Zachary's expression hardened. "How many?" "At least 15. Maybe more arriving. Word is Victor Blackwell himself is coming from Ely to handle the situation personally." The sheriff removed his hat, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I need you, Nolan. Need every badge I can get." The implications were clear. Piach stood on the brink of the kind of violence that had earned Nevada mining towns their bloody reputations. Without enough lawmen to maintain order, innocents would suffer. Zachary glanced at Eliza, conflict evident in his eyes. "I can't leave Miss Hayes unprotected." "Blackwell's still offering bounty for information on her whereabouts. Bring her to town," Caldwell suggested. "My wife can look after her at our place. It's safer than leaving her out here alone with Blackwell's men roaming the countryside." Eliza straightened her shoulders. "I don't need looking after. I can handle a gun." "This isn't about your capabilities, Miss Hayes," Caldwell said kindly but firmly. "It's about numbers. Blackwell has too many men for us to fight and protect you simultaneously if they discover you're here." The logic was sound, however much it chafed at Eliza's pride. She looked at the nearly completed wagon, symbol of her independence, and Zachary's dedication, then at the man himself, torn between his duty to the town and his promise to protect her. "Go," she said decisively. "The people of Piach need you more than I do right now. I'll stay with Mrs. Caldwell." Relief and admiration mingled in Zachary's expression. "We'll leave at first light," he decided. "Too dangerous to travel those roads at night with Blackwell's men about." After the sheriff departed to prepare for their arrival, Zachary and Eliza sat by the fire, the earlier moment of connection overshadowed by the looming crisis. Yet as they discussed preparations for the morning journey, Eliza found herself watching Zachary with new awareness, the way he methodically checked his weapons, his thoughtful consideration of alternative routes to town, the quiet competence that had drawn her to him from the beginning. "You should try to rest," he eventually advised. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Eliza nodded, rising to her feet. Before heading to the lean-to, however, she paused beside him. "Zachary," she said softly, "what you said earlier about your feelings, I want you to know that they're not one-sided." His eyes, reflecting the firelight, searched hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "Eliza, no, let me finish," she interrupted gently. "My father would have liked the man you've become, and so do I very much." She hesitated, then added, "Please be careful tomorrow." "I've lost enough already." Before he could respond, she leaned down and pressed a swift kiss to his cheek, then retreated to the lean-to, her heart pounding with the boldness of her actions. Inside, as she prepared for sleep, Eliza acknowledged the truth that had been growing within her since that first morning by the creek. Beyond gratitude, beyond admiration, her feelings for Zachary Nolan had blossomed into something deeper, something she hadn't believed possible amidst the ashes of her former life. Whatever tomorrow brought, that recognition changed everything. Dawn broke with a low mist clinging to the creek bed as Eliza and Zachary prepared for the journey to Piach. They worked in companionable silence, packing essentials and securing the camp. The nearly completed wagon would remain too unfinished for travel and too valuable to abandon entirely. "We'll take the high trail," Zachary decided as they mounted their horses. "Less traveled, better visibility if anyone's following." Eliza nodded, adjusting her riding skirt and checking the revolver tucked securely in the pocket Zachary had shown her how to sew into her garments. The new blue dress she wore, fashioned from the fabric he'd purchased, was both practical for riding and different enough from her usual attire to provide some disguise. They rode carefully, Zachary leading the way with the watchful alertness of a man accustomed to danger. The landscape unfolded around them, sagebrush plains giving way to rocky outcroppings as they climbed higher into the hills surrounding Piach. "Tell me about your plans," Zachary said as they paused to rest the horses near a spring. "After the wagon is finished and Blackwell's dealt with." Eliza considered the question, realizing she'd been so focused on immediate survival that longer-term planning had seemed like luxury. "Continue the freight business, I suppose. Maybe expand the routes if I can afford another wagon and team eventually." "Is that what you want? Or what you feel obligated to do for your father's memory?" The distinction struck Eliza as one she hadn't fully considered. "Both, I think. I'm good at it, better than I expected to be. There's satisfaction in providing a needed service, in keeping my word to customers." She smiled faintly. "And I admit, I enjoy proving wrong those who said a woman couldn't manage such a business." Zachary nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And beyond business, what do you want for yourself?" The question felt suddenly intimate, touching on dreams Eliza had set aside when she'd taken over her father's work. "Someday, a home of my own," she admitted. "Not just a rented room in town between deliveries, somewhere permanent." She hesitated, then added softly, "Perhaps someone to share it with if I found the right person, someone who wouldn't expect me to be less than I am." Their eyes met briefly before Zachary looked away, scanning the horizon with practiced vigilance. "A worthy dream," he said, his voice low. "One I share as it happens." Before Eliza could respond, Zachary stiffened, his attention caught by something in the distance. "Riders," he said tersely. "3 of them coming fast along the main road below." Eliza followed his gaze to where dust rose from the lower trail, horsemen moving with purpose toward Piach. "Blackwell's men, possibly." Zachary's expression darkened. "We should move. Stay higher, keep to cover where we can." They continued with increased caution, using the terrain to shield their progress. As they approached within a mile of town, the scattered buildings of Piach came into view, nestled against the hillside with the mine workings visible beyond. "Something's wrong," Zachary muttered, reining in his horse and reaching for the field glasses he carried. After a moment's study, his jaw tightened. "There's smoke coming from the east end of town, and too many men on the streets for this time of day." He handed Eliza the glasses. Through them, she could see figures moving hurriedly through Piach's main street, some carrying rifles. Near the mercantile, a group of men had formed a barricade of sorts, while at the opposite end of town, riders were gathering in front of the Silverton saloon. "It's starting already," she breathed. "The sheriff said Blackwell himself was coming. Could he have arrived early? If he pushed his horses through the night, maybe." Zachary took back the glasses, scanning the scene again. "Change of plans." The Caldwell house is too close to the center of town, too dangerous now. There's a lined shack about 2 miles west of here, used during cattle drives. You'll be safer there until this is resolved. Disappointment and relief warred within Eliza. Part of her wanted to ride straight into Piach, to face Blackwell and his men directly. But she understood the tactical reality her presence would only complicate an already volatile situation. "I'll show you the way," Zachary continued. "Then get to town to help Caldwell." They altered course, skirting wide around Piach's northern edge. The lined shack proved to be a crude but solid structure tucked into a sheltered a single room with a small corral attached, built for cowboys working the range. "It's not much," Zachary apologized as he helped Eliza dismount, "but it's defensible and out of sight." Inside, he quickly checked the space: a rough bunk, a small table, a cast iron stove, and basic supplies left for passing cowhands. Satisfied, he turned to Eliza, his expression grave. "Stay here. Keep the door barred. I'll return as soon as I can, or send word with someone you can trust." He hesitated, then added, "If I'm not back by morning, ride east toward Panaca. The sheriff there will help you." The implication that he might not return sent a chill through Eliza. "Zachary," she began, but found words inadequate for what she wanted to say. He stepped closer, his blue eyes intense. "Eliza, I need you to promise me something. If trouble comes here, don't try to fight. Run, hide, stay alive." "I'm not helpless," she protested. "I know that better than anyone," he replied, a fleeting smile softening his features. "But Blackwell doesn't fight fair, and he has too many men. Your father wouldn't want you to die for a business, no matter how much it meant to him." Eliza recognized the logic, however much it frustrated her. "I promise," she conceded. "But you must promise me something in return. Don't be reckless. Piach needs its deputy," and she faltered, then finished simply, "and I need you to come back." Something shifted in Zachary's expression, a softening, a certainty, a decision made. Without warning, he closed the distance between them, one hand rising to cup her cheek with exquisite gentleness. "I will come back to you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "That's a promise I intend to keep." Then he kissed her, not the hesitant first kiss of uncertain courtship, but the decisive act of a man who might be riding to his death, and had no more time for doubts or propriety. His lips were warm and certain against hers, communicating everything words had failed to express between them. Eliza's surprise lasted only a heartbeat before she responded, her hands gripping the front of his shirt as she returned the kiss with equal fervor. In that moment, the fear and uncertainty of the past days crystallized into something achingly clear. She had fallen in love with Zachary Nolan, and the thought of losing him terrified her more than Blackwell or his entire gang ever could. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Zachary rested his forehead against hers for a brief moment. "That," he said softly, "is something I've wanted to do since I found you by that creek." "Then you should have done it sooner," Eliza replied, attempting lightness despite the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. A reluctant smile touched his lips. "When this is over," he promised, "we'll have time for everything we've missed." With visible effort, he stepped back, his expression shifting from lover to lawman. "Bar the door behind me. Keep your revolver close." Eliza nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to speak past the tightness in her throat. As Zachary moved toward the door, she called his name one last time. He turned, silhouetted in the doorway. "I'll be waiting," she said simply. With a nod that contained both acknowledgement and promise, Zachary mounted his horse and rode toward Piach, leaving Eliza alone with her thoughts, her fears, and the lingering warmth of a kiss that had changed everything. Hours passed with excruciating slowness as Eliza waited in the lined shack, straining to hear any sound that might indicate approaching riders. Through the small window, she could see a faint haze of smoke hanging over Piach in the distance, evidence that whatever conflict had begun was still ongoing. The isolation felt both protective and maddening. She paced the confines of the small structure, checking her revolver repeatedly, rehearsing what she would do if Blackwell's men discovered her hideout. By late afternoon, anxiety had given way to a grim determination. If Zachary didn't return, she would not meekly flee as promised. She would find a way to continue the fight, to bring Victor Blackwell to justice for her wagon, for young Thomas Owen's injury, for the terror he'd brought to Piach. As dusk approached, the distant crack of gunfire reached her sporadic at first, then intensifying into what could only be described as a battle. Eliza moved to the doorway, unbarring it just enough to peer out toward town. In the gathering darkness, she could see flashes of gunfire and the orange glow of what appeared to be a larger fire. The temptation to ride toward town, to find Zachary and help however she could, was nearly overwhelming. Only her promise, and the knowledge that her presence might endanger others, kept her rooted in place, watching helplessly as the conflict played out miles away. The gunfire gradually subsided as full darkness fell, but the glow of fire remained visible on the horizon. Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Eliza stepped outside, scanning the landscape for any sign of approaching riders. The night was quiet save for the distant howl of a coyote and the soft nickering of her horse in the small corral. She was about to retreat inside when she heard the faint but unmistakable sound of hoofbeats approaching from the direction of Piach. Heart hammering, she ducked back into the shack, retrieving her revolver and taking position near the window where she could observe without being seen. A lone rider emerged from the darkness, moving at a steady pace rather than the gallop of pursuit. As the figure drew closer, moonlight revealed familiar broad shoulders and the glint of a badge. "Zachary," Eliza breathed, relief flooding through her as she recognized him. She unbarred the door fully, stepping out to meet him as he dismounted. His face was smudged with soot, his shirt torn at the shoulder where blood had dried in a dark stain. Exhaustion lined his features, but his eyes brightened at the sight of her. "You're hurt," Eliza said, moving immediately to examine his injury. "It's nothing, just a graze," he assured her, though he winced when her fingers probed gently at the wound. "We need to talk inside." Once the door was barred behind them, Zachary slumped onto the crude bench, accepting the water Eliza offered gratefully. "It's over," he said after drinking deeply. "Blackwell's dead. Most of his men are either killed, captured, or scattered." Relief and disbelief mingled as Eliza processed the news. "What happened?" "Blackwell arrived with reinforcements this afternoon, just as we expected, demanded the town submit to his protection or face consequences." Zachary's expression darkened with the memory. When Caldwell refused to back down, Blackwell's men opened fire. They'd been drinking, which made them bold but careless. He described the battle that followed, how the citizens of Piach, led by Sheriff Caldwell and armed with whatever weapons they possessed, had fought back against the outlaws. The mercantile owner, Owen, whose son had been wounded the day before, had proven particularly determined, rallying others to defend their town. Blackwell himself tried to set fire to the assay office when he realized things were turning against him, Zachary continued. "That's where I cornered him. He wouldn't surrender, drew on me instead." A shadow crossed his face. "I was faster." Eliza absorbed this, understanding the weight such a killing placed on a man like Zachary, who valued law and justice over vengeance. "You had no choice," she said softly. "No," he agreed, "but I take no pleasure in it, even knowing what he did to you and others. She fetched the medical supplies kept in the line shack and insisted on tending his wound properly. As she cleaned the bullet graze on his shoulder, Zachary continued his account. The fires mostly contained, the prisoners secured in the town jail, the 3 townspeople who had died in the fighting. "What happens now?" Eliza asked as she finished bandaging his shoulder. "Caldwell's sending riders to Carson City with news. There'll be a circuit judge through in a few weeks to try Blackwell's captured men." Zachary caught her hand as she withdrew it from his shoulder. "But that's not what I meant when I said we need to talk." The intensity in his gaze sent warmth spreading through Eliza's chest. "Oh, I made you a promise before I left," he reminded her, "that when this was over, we'd have time for everything we'd missed." Despite the seriousness of his tone, Eliza couldn't help the smile that tugged at her lips. "I seem to recall something of the sort." Zachary stood, still holding her hand, his expression solemn despite the warmth in his eyes. "Eliza Hayes, I know we've known each other only a short while, at least in the way that matters. But in that time, you've shown me more courage, determination, and heart than most people demonstrate in a lifetime." He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for what came next. "I'm not a wealthy man. I have some savings, a piece of land, and skills I'm proud of. I can offer you a home I'll build with these hands, and a promise that you'll never face trouble alone again as long as I draw breath." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "If you'll have me, I'd like to court you properly, with the intention of making you my wife when you're ready." The directness of the proposal, so characteristic of the man himself, took Eliza's breath away. There was no flowery sentiment, no grand gestures, just honest feeling and a promise she knew instinctively he would keep. "Zachary Nolan," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "I've spent the past year proving I don't need anyone to survive in this world." A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face before she continued. "But today, I learned the difference between needing someone and wanting them by your side." She stepped closer, her free hand rising to rest against his chest where his heart beat strong and sure. "Yes, I would be honored to be courted by you with all that implies." The smile that transformed his face then was like sunrise breaking over the Nevada mountains, brilliant and full of promise. With gentle reverence, he drew her into his arms and kissed her again, this time without the desperate urgency of potential farewell, but with the sweet certainty of a future unfolding before them. When they finally parted, Zachary rested his cheek against her hair, his voice low near her ear. "We should return to town tomorrow. It's safe now and there's a wagon waiting to be finished." "Our wagon," Eliza amended, the simple pronoun carrying worlds of meaning. "Our wagon," he agreed, "the first of many things we'll build together." In that moment, in a rough-lined shack miles from anywhere that might be called civilization, Eliza Hayes found herself thinking of fire, not the destructive flames that had consumed her father's wagon, but the warming, life-giving kind that sustained through cold nights and difficult journeys. The kind of fire that, properly tended, could last a lifetime. The Blackwell Gang had burned her wagon to ashes, thinking they could destroy her will along with her livelihood. Instead, they had unknowingly forged something stronger, a partnership born in adversity, tempered by shared purpose, and now glowing with the promise of love. As Zachary held her close in the dim light of the line shack, Eliza knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together, building, protecting, and cherishing what they created from the ashes of what had been lost. The return to Piach the following morning revealed a town wounded but unbowed. Buildings along Main Street showed scars from the battle bullet holes peppering wooden facades, charred timbers where fires had been extinguished, hastily boarded windows. But there was activity everywhere as citizens worked to repair the damage, an energy that spoke of resilience rather than defeat. Sheriff Caldwell met them near the jailhouse, his weathered face showing both exhaustion and satisfaction. "Good to see you safe, Miss Hayes," he greeted Eliza. "Blackwell's men have been singing like canaries since we locked them up, hoping for leniency from the circuit judge, I expect." "Have they mentioned me specifically?" Eliza asked, concerned that her return might reignite trouble. "Only to confirm what we already knew. Blackwell wanted your freight routes eliminated to consolidate his control over shipments to and from Piach." Caldwell's expression softened. "You're free to resume your business without fear, Miss Hayes. Those who aren't dead or jailed have scattered to the winds." The news brought a surge of relief, though Eliza knew rebuilding wouldn't happen overnight. "Thank you, Sheriff, for everything you and your men did to protect the town." "Just doing our job," he replied modestly, though pride gleamed in his eyes. "Though I expect I'll be needing a new deputy soon." This last was directed at Zachary with a knowing look. "Sir?" Zachary questioned, his hand instinctively finding Eliza's. "Don't play dumb with me, Nolan," Caldwell chuckled. "I've seen that look before. Besides, I noticed you didn't spend last night in town helping with the cleanup. Had somewhere more important to be, did you?" Heat rose to Eliza's cheeks even as Zachary answered steadily. "I had a promise to keep, Sheriff." "Good man." Caldwell nodded approvingly. "Miss Hayes deserves someone who keeps his word." He tipped his hat to Eliza. "Madam, if you need anything while you're getting back on your feet, you just let us know. Piach takes care of its own." As they continued through town, Eliza was touched by the reception she received. Word of her ordeal had spread, and many business owners greeted her with sympathy and assurances that they would resume their shipping contracts once she was operational again. "Your father would be proud," Mrs. Sullivan told her as they passed the millinery shop. "Standing up to those thugs took real courage." "I had help," Eliza replied, glancing at Zachary, who was discussing repairs with a shopkeeper whose windows had been shattered in the fighting. "So I see," Mrs. Sullivan observed with a meaningful smile. "Deputy Nolan's a good man. Best catch in the territory, if you don't mind my saying so." By afternoon, they had returned to Zachary's property, where the partially completed wagon waited like a symbol of interrupted possibilities now ready to be fulfilled. Without discussion, they fell back into their routine, working side by side to finish what they'd started, though now their labor was punctuated by exchanged glances and occasional touches that spoke of their altered relationship. "We could expand the bed by 6 inches, Zachary suggested as they fitted the final wheel. "Make it better for hauling larger freight." Eliza considered the suggestion, appreciating how naturally he included her in the decision-making. "That would be useful for the mining equipment orders," she agreed. The assay office mentioned needing regular deliveries of new equipment from Carson City. As the days passed, the wagon took final shape under their combined efforts, Zachary's craftsmanship, and Eliza's increasingly skilled assistance, creating something functional, yet distinctly their own. Unlike her father's more utilitarian vehicle, this one incorporated small refinements, better suspension for rough trails, clever storage compartments, even a reinforced lockbox beneath the driver's seat. "It's better than what I lost," Eliza admitted as they stood back to admire the finished product, freshly painted in a deep forest green with Hayes Freight lettered on the sides in gold. "You've kept your word and then some." "We built it together," Zachary corrected gently. "Just as we'll build whatever comes next." What came next unfolded with the same careful deliberation that characterized everything Zachary did. True to his word, he courted Eliza, properly accompanying her on visits to her customers as she re-established her freight business, joining her for meals at the hotel's dining room where Piach's citizens could observe their developing relationship, seeking permission from her aunt in Salt Lake City, who, upon meeting the handsome deputy, promptly revised her opposition to Eliza's unconventional career. Throughout that fall, as Eliza's business recovered and grew, they developed a partnership that extended beyond romance. Zachary continued his duties as deputy, while using his carpentry skills to help her expand, building a small stable for her growing team of horses, constructing storage facilities for goods awaiting delivery, designing a second, larger wagon as demand for her services increased. By early winter, with snow dusting the hills around Piach and the mines reducing operations for the season, Zachary finally turned his attention to the project he'd postponed, building his own home on the property by the creek. "Our home," he corrected when Eliza referred to it as his. "If you'll agree to make it official." They were standing on the site he'd marked out months earlier, now cleared and prepared for construction. The foundation stones were already in place, with lumber stacked nearby ready for framing. "Are you proposing, Deputy Nolan?" Eliza asked, her green eyes sparkling with mischief despite the seriousness of the moment. "I believe I am, Miss Hayes," he replied solemnly, though a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. From his pocket, he produced a small box. "Had this sent from San Francisco, wanted to do things properly." Inside lay a ring not ostentatious, but beautifully crafted, with a small diamond flanked by 2 emeralds that matched her eyes. "Zachary," she breathed, genuinely surprised by the thoughtful gift. "I promised to build you a wagon with my hands," he said, taking the ring and holding it poised before her finger. "Now I'm promising to build you a life, if you'll have me as your husband, one where neither of us has to face the trail alone again." Tears pricked at Eliza's eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming fullness of her heart. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit. As Zachary gathered her into his arms, Eliza found herself thinking of how much had changed in the span of a few months, from the night of fire and terror that had taken everything she owned to this moment of perfect contentment. "We'll be married in the spring," Zachary murmured against her hair. "By then, the house will be finished and your business will be established enough to take a short honeymoon. Perhaps to San Francisco." Eliza smiled against his chest, already imagining the journey they would take together. "Spring sounds perfect, and in the meantime we'll build." They were married on a clear April morning in 1877, with the hills around Piach turning green with new growth and wildflowers dotting the landscape. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, held in the newly rebuilt church, with Sheriff Caldwell giving the bride away in her father's stead. Eliza wore a gown of ivory silk ordered from San Francisco, while Zachary cut a handsome figure in a new suit, his deputy's badge polished to a high shine on his lapel. The reception that followed at the Grand Hotel was the most celebrated event Piach had seen since the end of the Blackwell Gang, with miners, merchants, and even the circuit judge in attendance. "To new beginnings," Sheriff Caldwell toasted, raising his glass to the newlyweds. "And to proving that even in the hardest places, goodness can take root and flourish." Later, as they drove away in the wagon they had built together, now decorated with ribbons and flowers for the occasion, Eliza leaned against her husband's shoulder, contentment washing through her. "Happy, Mrs. Nolan?" Zachary asked, his arm secure around her waist as he guided the horses toward their home. "Completely," she replied, turning her face up to his. "Though I'm keeping Hayes for business purposes. Hayes and Nolan Freight has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" His laugh, warm and genuine, was answer enough as they traveled the familiar road to the home they had built together on the land by the creek. Unlike the crude lean-to of their first days, a handsome two-story house now stood on the property, with a wide porch facing the water and ample room for the family they both hoped to create. Behind the house stood a large barn housing their freight wagons, with corrals for the growing number of horses required by their expanding business. What had begun as Eliza's determination to honor her father's legacy had evolved into a thriving enterprise serving mining operations and merchants throughout Lincoln County. As they reached their home, Zachary drew the wagon to a halt, turning to his bride with an expression of such tender devotion that Eliza felt her heart might burst with happiness. "Welcome home, Eliza," he said softly, before gathering her into his arms to carry her across the threshold, the final symbolic act in a journey that had begun with fire and ashes, but led to something far more precious than either could have imagined. In the years that followed, Hayes and Nolan Freight became one of the most respected businesses in eastern Nevada, known for reliability and fair dealing. Zachary continued as deputy until the birth of their first child, Walter Thomas Nolan, in 1878, after which he devoted himself fully to the freight business and his growing family. Eliza never forgot the night her wagon burned, nor the man who had promised to build her another with his hands. What neither of them had anticipated was how much more they would build together: a business, a home, a family, and a love that, like the best crafted wagon, was designed to weather every trail and terrain life could present. By 1885, with 3 children bringing laughter to their home by the creek and their freight business employing half a dozen drivers, Eliza sometimes marveled at how completely disaster had transformed into blessing. On quiet evenings, as she and Zachary sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the Nevada hills in gold and crimson, she would often take his hand, still strong and calloused from honest work, and remember the day he had found her, desperate and alone. "Do you ever wonder," she asked on one such evening, their youngest daughter asleep in her lap, "what would have happened if our paths hadn't crossed that morning by the creek?" Zachary considered the question with his characteristic thoughtfulness before answering. "I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some connections are meant to be, regardless of the path." Eliza smiled, leaning against his shoulder as the last light faded from the western sky. "Then I'm grateful for whatever hand guided us, even through fire and loss." "As am I," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Every single day." In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound echoing across the valley that had become their home. Above them, stars emerged in the vast Nevada sky, witnesses to a love story written not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the steady building of something meant to endure: one day, one choice, one promise kept at a time. The Outlaws had burned her wagon to ashes, but from those ashes, Eliza and Zachary Nolan had built something far more precious than any freight business or wooden conveyance. They had built a life together, proving that even in the wild heart of the western frontier, love could not only survive but flourish as strong, as practical, and as beautiful as a wagon built by loving hands.